You know, one of the strangest aspects of Disneyland history is that a lot of it seems completely lost, even though you would think that it would have some degree of documentation. For example, long before Main Street USA was turned into a series of shops that just sell generic Disney merch, the land itself had a lot more distinct variety, with each facade hosting individual shops or attractions that were themed appropriately to the turn of the 20th century. For instance, there was the Upjohn Pharmacy, a showcase of historical pharmacy products, the Yaletown Lock Shop, which displayed historical locks and keys, and the Intimate Apparel Shop, which, as one of Disneyland's most bizarre attractions, was hosted by a character known as the Wizard of Bras, who went into detail about the history of Victorian-era undergarments for women. Of course, Main Street had actual shops as well, such as Bluebird Shoes for Children, which is pretty self-explanatory, as well as Fine Tobacco, an actual tobacco shop for all your Disneyland smoking needs. However, you never see photos or video of what these shops looked like, which, considering that cameras for photo and video were much more expensive and less accessible in the past, it makes sense why very little documentation survives. However, considering how well Disneyland was documented on television, I'm genuinely surprised that there is no interior footage of any of the Main Street shops, which is a shame because I'm really curious about what that would have looked like, and if there was surviving photo or video in any meaningful quantity, I think that in itself would make for an interesting topic. However, another piece of Disneyland history that seems mostly lost is an extinct attraction known as Mine Train Through Nature's Wonderland, essentially a North American version of the Jungle Cruise, where you encounter animals through American landscapes. What's crazy to me is that while the majority of this attraction was outdoors, it still manages to have less documentation than the indoor Adventure Through Inner Space, a ride that was mostly obscured in the dark. That in itself is an immensely interesting attraction, shrinking riders down to the atomic level for a brush with existential horror. But luckily, there's enough footage out there to help piece together what it entailed, which I covered in a video from a while back if you're interested. Still, Mine Train Through Nature's Wonderland only seems to survive in very brief clips and photos, which again is bizarre because it took place mostly outdoors. However, I've always been fascinated by this attraction because it looks so cleverly designed, and in another world where it wasn't eventually replaced by Big Thunder Mountain, this could have easily become a Disney classic exactly like the Jungle Cruise, which makes its obscurity among the Disney fandom all the more confusing. So today, I wanted to piece together what photos and video I could to help give you the best sense of what this attraction was like, because if you haven't heard of this, you're missing out on one of the coolest rides ever made. So please leave a like, subscribe if you haven't already, and let's take a look at one of Disney's most fascinating, but obscure attractions lost to time. When Disneyland opened in 1955, a large segment of Frontierland was taken up by Rainbow Ridge, which was designed to emulate landscapes of the American West. Most people might be surprised to learn that park guests could traverse this area in stagecoaches, could board the alternative Conestoga wagons, or, most unusual of all, could ride pack mules, which were reported to often act stubborn and would refuse to move. Early Disneyland was such a creative but outrageous endeavor, and quickly, the following year in 1956, a new attraction opened that was known as the Rainbow Caverns Mine Ride. Starting off alongside a little western town facade that blended into Frontierland, riders boarded the electric train and went through a tunnel into a new area known as the Living Desert, and from there ended the short ride by moving through the Rainbow Caverns, where riders would witness the wonder of waterfalls, which were colored to display the spectrum of the rainbow. I won't go into detail about this ride, because by 1960, the ride track was expanded significantly, and the scenes were incorporated into the newer and longer experience, becoming Mine Train Through Nature's Wonderland. It started off the same with a station located in the western town, which is actually still around, as the facades still stand at the end of Big Thunder Mountain today. After riders leave the station, They move through a tunnel like before, but the ride now opens up to a scene called Beaver Valley, named after a Disney nature documentary from the True Life Adventure series. The automatic narration would call your attention to the right side of the train, where you would be able to look down and see beavers spread in the grass alongside their dam, as you might expect. However, there was a pretty cool but simple mechanical effect, where beavers would swim in a circle in the pond, and as the trains continued through the landscape and followed the river, you could spot a raccoon taking a drink and swiping its tail. Quickly, the narration brought riders' attention to marmots chattering over a tunnel, and the train would move through, emerging out alongside the rivers of America. The actual tunnel is still present in the park today, having been boarded up near Big Thunder Mountain, and if you experience any of the attractions on the river, you can actually still see the track from Nature's Wonderland, which has been worked into the current theming. Back when the ride operated though, the train would move under what was called Big Thunder Falls, which obviously inspired the name of the future roller coaster, and then would pass by Cascade Peak, where a multi-step waterfall would end in a split named the Twin Sisters, called so because they're always babbling, according to the very dated narration. After rounding the artificial mountain, the train moved through another tunnel and into a scene called Bear Country, again named after another true life documentary. The narrator would warn you that the trestle was a little rickety, implying that it could fall down while you're trying to cross it, but the main attraction here was of course the mechanical bears. Up on land, you could spot a baby bear climbing to the top of a tree, and along with one standing bear, there was a third that would move up and down, comedically scratching its back on the bark. If you looked down in the Bear River, you would spot a few bears poking up while trying to feed on fish, and there was another that would swim around, achieved through another hidden underwater mechanism. There were also mechanical fish that would jump out of the water as if being disturbed, which is still an effect you can see behind Big Thunder Mountain today, along with the tunnel still remaining visible to park guests as well. The train then quickly moved into a new scene called Olympic Elk, also named after another true life documentary, where two mechanical elk are locking antlers and trying to fight for dominance. The train then passed under the Pack Mule Trail, which the narrator calls Natural Arch Bridge, in what is obviously intentional irony, and this works to transition the ride into the Living Desert, which was also named after a Disney documentary, and remember, was original to the 1956 version of the ride. Moving along the buttes and hoodoos, the narrator would warn you to watch out for sidewinders and varmints, which included gophers on the rocks, and what I believe was supposed to be a kit fox. The narrator also highlights the yellow and red streaks among the sandstone cliffs as the train moves into a saguaro cactus forest, where he also implies that the heat can sometimes make you see funny things. Traveling through, the cactus begin to take on weird humanoid shapes as if you're hallucinating, and there's even a few small ones gathered together called the Seven Dwarfs. Next, the train passes by wild pigs looking up at a bobcat on top of a cactus, which to my surprise, made its way into Magic Kingdom's Big Thunder Mountain in the flooded town scene. Moving on, the narrator now highlights the Devil's Paint Pots, a series of bubbling mud pots like you might find in Yellowstone, but instead made whimsical by dyeing the water various colors. Geysers also erupt close by, with one called Ol and Faithful often spraying riders with a light mist for a little bit of thrilling excitement. After looping back and passing howling coyotes and a T-Rex skeleton embedded in the stone, riders then moved through Balancing Rock Canyon, where as the narrator warns that any loud noise can set off a landslide, the train conductor blows the whistle, triggering a fun mechanical effect where balancing rocks and boulders threaten to fall onto riders. After a quick escape, a massive growling bobcat perched on a rock threatens to jump into the train. And moving on, as riders approach a tunnel, a mountain lion emerges from the cave above, with the narrator warning them to be quiet so they can pass through safely. Moving into a cave system, this is known as the Rainbow Caverns, which were meant to inspire wonder as park guests witness colorful water features, with the narrator calling out specific formations like the Geyser Grotto and the Witch's Cauldron. There unfortunately isn't any color footage of this part of the ride, but I do wonder how this effect was done. If we go back to the Devil's Paint Pots, it's clear that their color was achieved through dye in the water, but I think that in the caverns, the effect likely used colored lights, which I think is the most plausible explanation considering that it was in the dark. After this transcendental trip through the Rainbow Caverns, the train emerged back out to the station at Rainbow Ridge, making for an abrupt end to what is otherwise a fascinating ride, as riders listened to the disembark safety spiel and made their way back into the park. Mine Train Through Nature's Wonderland closed in 1977 to be replaced with Big Thunder Mountain, which obviously is very much a spiritual successor. Between its runaway mine train through orange buttes and hoodoos, it's littered with comedic scenes that feature animals in the spirit of Nature's Wonderland, and of course, there are many elements directly lifted from the ride. As I pointed out earlier, the name Big Thunder Mountain, which opened at Disneyland in 1979, comes from Big Thunder Falls, and the pigs and Bobcat on the Cactus made their way to the Magic Kingdom version of the ride, which opened in 1980. The Disneyland version recycles the old facades of the station, which is a nice touch, and while I wasn't able to find photos or video of the T-Rex bones, you can find a callback to them in both versions, with Magic Kingdom having them located among the geysers as another reference to the ride. Finally, the first lift hill of each ride is flanked by colorful pools in the Rainbow Caverns, an obvious nod to the last scene of Nature's Wonderland. While I like that the spirit of the ride lives on, I'm convinced that if it hadn't eventually been demolished, Mine Train Through Nature's Wonderland would have lived on as a Disney classic on par with the Jungle Cruise. It of course would need to be updated, as the mechanical figures would have likely been replaced with animatronics, and the narration would have obviously been changed as well to keep the ride fresh. I think part of its decline has to do with the exotic nature of the Jungle Cruise, because while the animals of South America, Asia, and Africa can be quite exciting, the animals of North America can be a little less appealing because they're a lot more familiar to American audiences. That still doesn't take away from what's cool about the ride though, and I'm genuinely surprised that the legacy hasn't held up to the same level as other Disney classics like Horizons, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, World of Motion, and The Great Movie Ride. I think part of the lack of popularity in the Disney theme park culture might have a lot to do with its lack of documentation, which again is surprising. But this is exactly the kind of classic Disney attraction that I think has a lot of appeal. The fundamental idea, a pleasant train ride through the wilderness filled with scenic landscapes, funny gags, and animatronic animals, just gives off so much charm. And luckily, Disneyland still preserves a lot of that spirit, not just through Big Thunder Mountain, but through the various attractions located on the Rivers of America. So, I wanted to produce this video to piece together a lost part of Disney history, one that I personally find fascinating, and I hope that through watching, you might agree that this is a significant loss too. While this video is definitely a shorter one, I spent a lot of time trying to sort through footage to give you the best sense of what this attraction entailed, and if you would like to support my research, I would very much appreciate it if you left a like. As always though, if you haven't yet subscribed and hit the bell notification yet either, you can also do so now to be alerted to new videos as they're released.